They say every revolution begins with a funeral. On that rain-soaked October morning in 1999, as Marcus Jackson stood over his younger brother's grave, he didn't know he was about to ignite a movement that would shake Detroit to its core. Damon Jackson, 21 years old, unarmed, shot 17 times by police officers who claimed they feared for their lives. When he reached for his wallet, the same story, different day, another black body added to America's endless cemetery of injustice. But this time would be different, because the man standing at that grave wasn't just another grieving brother. Marcus Jackson had spent the last decade as one of Detroit's most feared gang leaders, controlling entire neighborhoods through violence and intimidation. The police knew him, the streets knew him, and now they were about to meet a different Marcus Jackson entirely. What happens when a man who's mastered the language of violence discovers the explosive power of consciousness? What happens when the oppressed stop fighting each other and turn their rage toward the system that keeps them down? The authorities had made a fatal mistake. They had killed the wrong man's brother, and in doing so, they had transformed their most dangerous enemy from a gang leader who controlled blocks into a revolutionary who would awaken thousands. This is the story of Marcus Jackson, based on true events that the powerful tried to bury. A story of transformation so radical, so threatening to the established order, that they did everything in their power to stop it. They failed, because you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. And Marcus Jackson was about to prove that the most dangerous weapon in America isn't a gun. It's an awakened mind ready to fight for freedom.
Standing there in that cemetery, rain mixing with my tears, I felt something die inside me. But it wasn't just grief. It was the old Marcus. The one who thought having soldiers in territory meant power. The one who played their game, keeping my own people down, while the real enemy watched us destroy each other from behind badges and courtroom benches. Damon was reaching for his wallet to show ID. 17 bullets. They executed my baby brother for existing while black, and in that moment I understood. We weren't gangs, we were armies. Misguided armies fighting the wrong war. But what if we turned those armies toward the real enemy? What if instead of controlling corners, we liberated minds? They created their worst nightmare that day, because a conscious black man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. That's the system's deepest fear come to life.
The Detroit that Marcus Jackson returned to after his brother's funeral was a city at war with itself. But this wasn't the war they showed on the evening news. This was a deeper conflict between those who profited from black suffering and those who survived despite it. By 1999, Detroit had become America's laboratory for systematic oppression. Unemployment in black neighborhoods hit 40%. Schools looked like prisons, with metal detectors and armed guards instead of new textbooks and hope. The police operated like an occupying army, conducting military-style raids that left children traumatized and fathers in handcuffs for crimes as small as unpaid tickets. And Marcus Jackson? He was supposed to be part of the problem. For 10 years, he'd run the East Side Disciples, controlling drug corners from 7 Mile to the river. The media called him a menace. The police had a thick file with his name on it. But they didn't understand what they'd created when they murdered Damon Jackson. Walking through his old territory, Marcus saw it all differently now. Every young man on those corners wasn't a soldier. He was a brother, a son, a wasted potential. Every crack house wasn't just a business. It was a tombstone marking where hope had died. The same system that flooded these streets with drugs and guns now pointed fingers at the victims, calling them animals while profiting from their destruction. His former lieutenants didn't understand the change. "When we hitting back?" they asked, hands already on their weapons. They expected war. Marcus was planning something far more dangerous, revolution. But first, he had to transform himself. Night after night, Marcus devoured books he'd never known existed. Malcolm X's autobiography showed him the power of transformation. Huey Newton taught him that power flows from consciousness, not gun barrels. Fred Hampton's words about the Rainbow Coalition revealed how the system's greatest fear was unity among the oppressed. Each page was like scales falling from his eyes. But consciousness without action is just philosophy. Marcus began attending community meetings, trying to bridge two worlds that had never communicated. The established activists looked at him with suspicion and fear. Here was Marcus Jackson, the gang leader whose name mothers used to frighten children into obedience, talking about liberation and unity. They couldn't see past his reputation to the revolutionary being born. "You want to help?" An elderly churchwoman told him at one meeting. "Stop poisoning our children with your drugs." She didn't understand that Marcus had already ordered his entire organization to cease operations. The corners were empty, but the police and media hadn't noticed. They needed their convenient villain. The system's response was swift and predictable. Police surveillance intensified. Unmarked cars followed Marcus everywhere. They pulled him over daily, searching for weapons he no longer carried, drugs he no longer sold. They were looking for the old Marcus, unable to comprehend that their brutality had created something far more threatening. City Councilman Robert Hayes, a black face on white power, held a press conference announcing a new gang task force. With increased funding for police militarization, Marcus watched Hayes perform for the cameras, knowing this same man had taken bribes from drug suppliers for years, ensuring certain corners remained unpoliced while others faced constant raids. The breaking point came at a public safety meeting. Hayes was promising more arrests, more prosecutions, more prisons. The audience of frightened elderly residents applauded, desperate for any solution to the violence surrounding them. Marcus stood up. "You want to know why there's violence?" His voice boomed across the auditorium. "Ask why there's no jobs. Ask why the schools are falling apart. Ask why the same cops who shot my unarmed brother protect the drug corners that pay them off." Security moved quickly, but Marcus kept speaking as they dragged him out. Robert Hayes took $50,000 from the Delray suppliers. Check his offshore accounts. The police are the biggest gang in Detroit. They threw him onto the concrete outside, Hayes emerging to personally threaten him. "You're done in this city, Jackson. One word from me and you're in a cell forever." But Marcus just smiled, because in that moment, he realized the system's weakness. They could only threaten him with what he'd already survived. Prison? He'd been there. Death? They'd already killed his brother. What they couldn't fight was an idea whose time had come. That night, on a rooftop overlooking the city, Marcus began writing. Not a plan for revenge, but a manifesto for revolution. Below him, sirens wailed through streets where young black men killed each other over corners they didn't own, protecting drug trades that enriched suburban suppliers and corrupt politicians. The same streets where police executed the innocent and called it justice. "The revolution starts in the hood," he wrote at the top of the page. Because if you could transform gang members into revolutionaries, if you could turn the most oppressed into the most conscious, if you could unite those the system had trained to hate each other, then you could change everything. Marcus Jackson was no longer just a gang leader seeking revenge. He was an awakened black man with organizational skills, street credibility, and nothing left to lose. The system had created its perfect enemy. They just didn't know it yet.
You know what's funny about consciousness? Once you get it, you can't give it back. It's like seeing the Matrix for what it really is. All those years, I thought I was a king. East Side Disciples, 300 soldiers, territory from 7 Mile to Jefferson. I controlled corners, moved product, counted money. I thought that was power. But sitting in that apartment, reading these books, I felt like a fool. A useful fool. They let us fight over corners we didn't own. Let us kill each other over drug trades that made white suppliers rich. Let us go to prison while they collected campaign donations from private jail corporations. We were doing their work for them, keeping our own people down. Malcolm said the house slave would fight harder for the master's house than the master himself. That was us, fighting to protect a system that was designed to destroy us. And for what? So I could drive a Bentley through neighborhoods where kids went to bed hungry? So I could wear chains while my people remained enslaved? Every corner I controlled was a corner where dreams died. Every young soldier I recruited was a doctor, teacher, or engineer the world would never see. And when the police finally came for us, the same system that flooded our streets with their drugs called us animals and locked us in their cages. But see, that's where they messed up with me. Killing Damon freed me from the illusion. What's a man with nothing to lose? Dangerous. What's an educated man with nothing to lose? Revolutionary. What's an organized, street-certified, educated man with nothing to lose and 300 soldiers waiting for orders? That's the system's worst nightmare. They thought they were containing gang violence. Really, they were training urban guerrillas. Every raid taught us tactics. Every prison sentence taught us discipline. Every death taught us sacrifice. All we needed was consciousness to turn those skills toward liberation instead of self-destruction. The old activists didn't trust me. I understood. How do you trust a man whose hands are soaked in community blood? But they didn't understand transformation. They didn't understand that the same passion that made me a feared gang leader could make me a fearless revolutionary. The same organizational skills that built a drug empire could build a movement. And my soldiers? They were ready for war, just aimed at the wrong enemy. What's reading books gonna do against bullets, they asked. Everything, because bullets kill bodies, but books build armies. Not armies of flesh that the system could destroy, but armies of consciousness that no prison could contain. That night on the rooftop, writing my manifesto, I wasn't just planning a movement. I was declaring war. Not the kind of war they expected. No drive-bys, no retaliation hits. This would be a war of awakening. Every mind liberated would be a soldier gained. Every consciousness raised would be a territory taken. They created me when they killed Damon. And now, I was about to return the favor by creating thousands more like me. Because once the hood gets consciousness, the whole system falls. That's not a threat. That's a promise written in the blood of every brother and sister they sacrificed on the altar of their prophets.
The Bethel Recreation Center had seen better days. Paint peeled from walls that had witnessed decades of community meetings, youth basketball games, and funeral repasts. But on that November evening in 1999, it was about to witness something unprecedented, the birth of a revolution from the ashes of gang warfare. 53 members of the East Side Disciples gathered in the main hall, street soldiers who had followed Marcus Jackson through wars that left countless dead and even more imprisoned. They came expecting orders for retaliation. What they got instead would change their lives forever. Marcus stood before them transformed. Gone was the gold chain and designer clothes. In their place stood a man in simple black, holding not weapons but books. The room bristled with confusion and anger. This was their general, their street legend, and he was talking about reading? "I know what you're thinking," Marcus began, his voice carrying the same authority that once commanded absolute obedience. This brother lost his mind. Damon dies and Marcus goes soft. He paused, letting the tension build. "But I'm about to show you who really killed Damon. And it wasn't just those cops." What followed was a masterclass in revolutionary education, translated through street linguistics. Marcus didn't quote Marx or Fanon directly. Instead, he broke down the economics of oppression in language his soldiers understood. "Y'all remember when Jerome's Corner got hit last month?" Marcus asked, pointing to a young lieutenant. "Lost 2 soldiers, $250,000 in product. Who you think got rich off that loss? Not us. The supplier in Grosse Pointe just raised prices. The cops who confiscated that product? Check their bank accounts. The private prison that got 2 more bodies? They collect $40,000 per year per inmate from taxpayers." He drew diagrams on a cracked whiteboard, showing how drug money flowed like blood from their community. Every dollar made on corners funded suburban suppliers. Every arrest fed the prison industrial complex. Every death justified more police funding. They weren't players in the game. They were the game pieces being sacrificed. The room's energy began to shift. Crossed arms uncrossed. Skeptical faces showed flickers of understanding. When Marcus challenged them to do the math, add up everything they'd earned versus everyone they'd buried, the silence was deafening. Jerome, barely 21 with eyes that had seen too much, stood up. "I've made maybe 200 grand in 5 years," he said quietly. "Lost 17 homies. My baby sister scared to play outside. My mama can't sleep without pills. That math don't add up. One by one, others began speaking. Stories of brothers lost, families destroyed, dreams deferred. The anger was still there, but now it had a new target. They'd been shooting at each other while the real enemy counted profits from safe distances. So what we do? Another soldier asked. Can't fight the system with books. Marcus smiled. Who says we can't? Every corner we control becomes a library. Every soldier becomes a teacher. Every gun we put down, we pick up a ballot. They want us ignorant and violent, so we become educated and organized. That's the revolution. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Some left, unable to imagine life without the violence that had defined them. But most stayed, hungry for the purpose Marcus offered. Gang meetings became political education sessions. Drug corners transformed into community watch posts. The same organizational structure that moved drugs now moved consciousness. Marcus taught reading to soldiers who'd dropped out in middle school. Former dealers learned about economics, understanding for the first time how they'd been exploited. The hierarchy remained, but now lieutenants were responsible for educating their squads, not arming them. The community watched in disbelief. Marcus Jackson's gang studying instead of shooting, protecting elders instead of poisoning children. When Marcus's mother visited one session and saw her son teaching young men to read, she wept openly. I got my son back, she whispered. Lord gave me back my baby. The first march shocked Detroit. 100 former gang members, still wearing their leather jackets but now carrying books and voter registration forms, walked peacefully through neighborhoods they once terrorized. Elderly residents who had barricaded themselves indoors for years watched from windows as their former predators became protectors. The revolution had begun, not with bullets, but with books, not with violence, but with consciousness. And the system that had created Marcus Jackson was about to learn what happened when the oppressed stopped oppressing each other and turned their eyes upward toward power.
Standing in that rec center, looking at my soldiers' faces, I saw myself. Young brothers who never had a chance, who chose the streets because the streets chose them first. Society threw them away before they could walk, then acted surprised when they became what they were treated as, disposable. But that night I watched something beautiful happen. I watched the scales fall from their eyes like they'd fallen from mine. Jerome doing the math on his losses. Tequan realizing his supplier lived in a mansion while his mama struggled with rent. Little Jay understanding that the cops who killed my brother were protecting the same drug trade they arrested us for. You can't unsee truth once you see it. You can't unknow what you know. Every book we opened was a door to liberation. Every concept we grasped was a chain breaking. The same intelligence they used to track police patterns and calculate drug profits could analyze systems of oppression and organize communities. They called us thugs, animals, super predators. But we were generals without armies, scholars without schools, leaders without causes. All that potential wasted on destroying each other while our real enemies got rich off our blood. But no more. Every corner we liberated from drugs was a victory. Every young brother who picked up a book instead of a gun was a soldier gained. Every grandmother who could finally walk to church without fear was a testament to transformation. The hardest part wasn't learning to fight differently. It was learning to see ourselves differently. We'd internalized their hatred, believed their lies about our worth. But consciousness is like sunlight. It burns away lies and shows truth, no matter how painful. That first march, walking through our hood with books instead of heat, I felt Damon with us. This is what he would have wanted. Not revenge that perpetuated cycles, but revolution that broke them. Every step we took was a step toward freedom, and Detroit would never be the same.
The system's response to Marcus Jackson's revolution was as predictable as it was vicious. They couldn't kill the message, so they tried to destroy the messengers. What followed was a masterclass in state repression that would have broken lesser movements. But Marcus had learned from history. Every revolution faces its darkest hour before dawn. It started with the arrests. 5 former East Side disciples, now teaching literacy in community centers, were dragged from their beds in pre-dawn raids. The charges? Years-old cases suddenly resurrected, witnesses mysteriously appearing with perfect recall of events from half a decade ago. The message was clear: abandon the movement or face the past. The media assault was coordinated and relentless. Channel 7 ran a week-long series titled Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, featuring dramatic reenactments of old gang violence while suggesting the movement was elaborate cover for criminal enterprises. Prosecutors gave daily press conferences, warning residents not to be fooled by criminal rebranding. Detective Ray Morrison, who had built his career on Marcus's case file, became the face of opposition. A leopard doesn't change its spots, he told cameras, standing before a display of old arrest photos. Marcus Jackson is playing a long game, but we see through it. This is organized crime, not organized activism. Inside the movement, pressure mounted like steam in a boiler. Young soldiers who had embraced consciousness were being harassed daily. Traffic stops turned into hours-long ordeals. Employers received anonymous calls about hiring dangerous gang members. Banks froze accounts citing suspicious activity in deposits from community fundraisers. The breaking point came when Terrell, a 19-year-old who'd become one of the movement's best educators, was beaten by police during a routine stop. As members gathered in the warehouse, rage filled the air like smoke. Old instincts surfaced, hands reached for weapons no longer carried, voices called for retaliation. "They want us to be peaceful while they break our bones," shouted Jerome, sporting fresh bruises from his own encounter. "How long we supposed to turn the other cheek?" Marcus faced his greatest test. These men had followed him through street wars where violence was law. Now he asked them to absorb brutality without response. The old Marcus would have already planned revenge. But the revolutionary Marcus understood the trap. "You think I don't want to fight back?" he roared, commanding silence. "You think I don't dream about it? But that's exactly what they want. One shot fired, one cop touched, and they have excuse to kill us all. We're not playing their game anymore." He implemented new protocols. Members traveled in groups, always with cameras. They studied legal rights, memorizing statute numbers and constitutional amendments. Every interaction with police was documented, building cases that lawyers could use. It wasn't as satisfying as retaliation, but it was sustainable. The external pressure was matched by internal challenges. Big Mike Williams, who had taken over several corners abandoned by Marcus's transformation, saw opportunity in the movement's nonviolence. His message to the streets was simple: Jackson gone soft. East Side is open territory now. The meeting between the two leaders took place in neutral territory, a Baptist church whose pastor mediated street conflicts. Big Mike arrived with 20 soldiers, gold chains catching light like armor. Marcus came with books and 5 reformed members. "You used to be somebody," Big Mike sneered. "Now you're just another preacher without a church. Your corners are mine now." Marcus's response revealed the strategic mind that once made him feared. "Take them. Every corner you claim is another plantation you're managing for masters who'll never respect you. When you're doing life in federal prison, remember this conversation." The infiltration attempts were almost comical in their transparency. New members appeared, too eager, asking questions about past crimes and future plans. Marcus turned teaching counter-surveillance into community education, showing members how to spot informants and document provocateurs. The legal assault escalated when Councilman Hayes, feeling pressure from Marcus's exposure of his corruption, pushed through a gang injunction. The order made it illegal for known gang members to gather in groups larger than 3, effectively criminalizing the movement's existence. Marcus's response was brilliant. He organized freedom schools in churches, legal under religious exemption. When police arrived to shut down a session on African history, they found not just former gang members but grandmothers, teachers, and church deacons forming human shields. "You're going to arrest grandmothers for learning history?" Marcus asked the sergeant as news cameras rolled. The image of elderly black women standing between police and education became the movement's most powerful recruiting tool. but the deepest cut came from within. Anthony, one of Marcus's most trusted lieutenants, who had helped design the movement's structure, was exposed as an informant. The revelation came through leaked documents showing years of cooperation. Every meeting recorded, every plan reported. The confrontation was private but profound. Anthony, cornered with evidence, broke down. They had me on a third strike. Life without parole or help them. What would you have done? The old Marcus would have answered with violence. The revolutionary Marcus felt only sadness. I would have told my brothers the truth. We would have fought the case together. Instead, you sold us out for a deal they'll never honor. Anthony was expelled but unharmed. Message sent that the movement's commitment to nonviolence was absolute. But the betrayal cut deep. How many others were feeding information? How many plans were compromised? By winter's end, the movement seemed on the verge of collapse. Members imprisoned, resources frozen, infiltrators exposed, territory lost. Marcus sat alone in his apartment, exhausted beyond measure. The photo of Damon stared back at him, questioning whether the price of consciousness was too high. Outside, sirens wailed through Detroit nights, soundtrack to a city where young black men still killed each other while the system profited. The revolution seemed stalled, the old patterns reasserting themselves like muscle memory. But Marcus had studied history. He knew every movement faced moments when defeat seemed certain. The Black Panthers, decimated by SOINTLPRO. The Freedom Riders, beaten and jailed. Malcolm, Martin, Fred, all faced systematic destruction. The question wasn't whether the system would attack, but whether the attacked would endure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new arrests, new betrayals. But tonight, in the darkness of his apartment, Marcus Jackson made a decision. The revolution would continue, not because victory was certain, but because surrender was impossible. They had awakened something that couldn't be put back to sleep.
You know what they don't tell you about revolution? It's not the enemies outside that break you. It's the weight of leadership when everything's falling apart. When brothers you've awakened get beaten down for their consciousness. When families suffer for your vision. When you lie awake wondering if the old ways were easier. Anthony's betrayal hit different than any bullet could. This was a brother who helped me see the light, who taught alongside me, who I trusted with everything. Finding out he was recording us, reporting our dreams to our oppressors, that's a special kind of pain. Makes you question everyone, everything. But that's the system's genius, isn't it? They don't just attack your body, they poison your spirit, make you paranoid, isolated, broken. They want you to give up not because they beat you, but because you beat yourself. Every arrested brother, every frozen account, every media lie, all designed to make you think, was it worth it? And in those dark moments, when 5 brothers are in cells because they chose books over bullets, when grandmothers get harassed because they attend your classes, when kids go hungry because their father's employer fired him for association, you feel the weight of every decision. The old me would have handled Big Mike with violence, sent a message written in blood, would have made Anthony disappear, sent a different message. That Marcus was simpler, cleaner, eye for an eye until everyone's blind. But consciousness means carrying weight the unconscious can't imagine. Every night I stare at Damon's picture and ask, is this what you'd want? Your brother building something beautiful while the wolves circle? Or would you want me to pick up the gun, go out like we always expected, young, violent, and forgotten? But then I remember Jerome teaching a kid to read. Remember Miss Washington walking to church without fear for the first time in 20 years. Remember the light in a young brother's eyes when he understands he's not worthless, that he's been lied to his whole life about his potential. That's worth more than any corner, any revenge, any satisfaction violence could bring. Because we're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for every black child born into this system designed to destroy them. Every consciousness we raise is a victory they can't reverse. They want me to break, want us to return to killing each other so they can point and say, see, animals. But we're not animals. We're lions who discovered we were raised by hyenas. And once you know what you are, you can't unknow it. So tomorrow I'll wake up, put on this same leather jacket, and face whatever comes. More raids, more lies, more betrayals. Because the alternative, letting them win, letting Damon's death mean nothing, letting another generation grow up thinking the corner is their only option, that's not an alternative at all. The revolution continues. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. And they'll learn what we've learned. You can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail revolution.
By the spring of 2000, something unprecedented was happening in Detroit's forgotten neighborhoods. The same corners that once ran red with blood now bloomed with community gardens. The same hands that once held guns now held books, teaching children to read. The same voices that once ordered violence now preached revolution. Marcus Jackson hadn't just transformed himself. He had transformed the very meaning of power in the hood. The movement that began with 50 former gang members had swelled to over 2,000. But numbers alone didn't capture the depth of change. These weren't just followers. They were teachers, organizers, protectors. Each one had their own story of transformation, their own journey from destruction to construction. The old trap house on Chalmers Street told the story best. Once a fortress of addiction, it now housed the Damon Jackson Learning Center, where former dealers taught mathematics to kids who'd written off education. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, drug dealers proving better at teaching math than the underfunded school system that had abandoned these children. Marcus had evolved too. The leather jacket remained, but now it was accompanied by dashikis and Kent cloth, representing a deeper connection to African heritage. His reading had expanded from revolutionary theory to psychology, economics, conflict resolution. He wasn't just teaching revolution, he was modeling it. The peace treaty between the East Side Disciples, the 7 Mile Bloods, and the Chatsey crew would have been impossible under the old rules. These groups had been killing each other for territory since the 1980s. But Marcus brought their leaders together with a different proposition. We're fighting over corners we don't own in neighborhoods we're destroying. What if we united to build instead of divided to die? The negotiations took weeks, held in the basement of St. Augustine's Church. Old grievances surfaced, brothers killed, territories lost, respect violated. But Marcus reframed each conflict through the lens of systemic oppression. Who benefited when Rodney killed Terrence? Not us. The same system that armed both sides and imprisoned the survivors. When the treaty was signed, it wasn't just a ceasefire, it was an alliance. 3 armies that once fought each other now worked together. Their combined strength focused on community protection and political education. The image of former enemies embracing made front pages, forcing Detroit to reconsider its narrative about irredeemable gang members. The Cop Watch program showed the movement's strategic evolution. Armed with cameras and legal knowledge, teams monitored police interactions, documenting abuse while ensuring community safety. Police who once operated with impunity now faced constant observation, their actions recorded and reviewed by lawyers the movement had attracted. The voter registration drives revealed political sophistication. Marcus understood that consciousness without power meant nothing. They fear us with guns, he taught. They terror flee us with votes. In neighborhoods where turnout had been below 10%, registration hit 70%. Politicians who had ignored these areas for decades suddenly appeared, making promises. Even Detective Morrison, Marcus's longtime adversary, couldn't deny the transformation. During a chance encounter outside the courthouse, the weathered cop pulled Marcus aside. "I spent 10 years trying to put you away," Morrison admitted. "Maybe I was looking at the wrong criminals." It wasn't friendship, but it was respect. And in their world, respect meant everything. The community breakfast program fed both bodies and souls. Every Saturday, volunteers served free meals while teaching nutrition, financial literacy, and history. The sight of tattooed former gang members gently serving eggs to elderly grandmothers became the movement's most powerful advertisement. Marcus's influence spread beyond Detroit. Universities invited him to speak, his unique credibility bridging streets and scholarship. Professors who had theorized about urban violence listened as someone who had lived it explained its real causes and solutions. Students who had never seen a ghetto understood systemic oppression through Marcus's lived experience. But perhaps the most powerful moment came quietly during a community event. 8-year-old Malik approached Marcus, clutching a worn photo. "My daddy died in the streets," the boy said simply. "Will you teach me to be strong without being violent?" Marcus knelt, meeting the child's eyes, seeing himself, seeing Damon, seeing every lost son of the streets. "Violence is easy," he told Malik. "Real strength is building when everyone expects you to destroy. Real power is lifting others when you've been pushed down. Your daddy's watching, and we're gonna make him proud." The Spring Festival in Rouge Park captured the transformation perfectly. 5,000 people gathered, former enemies sharing food, children playing without fear, elderly residents dancing to music that celebrated life instead of death. Marcus stood at the edge, watching his vision manifest. This wasn't the revolution he'd imagined in his grief and rage. It was better. Instead of burning down the system, they were building alternatives. Instead of destroying their oppressors, they were creating spaces where oppression couldn't survive. Every child educated was a victory. Every peace treaty signed was resistance. Every consciousness raised was rebellion. Detroit's power structure had tried to crush the movement with arrests, infiltration, and violence. They had failed because they misunderstood its nature. This wasn't a gang reformed. This was a community reborn. And Phoenix-like, it was rising from ashes that the system itself had created.
Transformation ain't like the movies. There's no moment where heavenly light hits and you're suddenly different. It's daily choices, hourly battles with old patterns. Every morning I wake up, the old Marcus is still there, whispering that violence is simpler than this weight I carry now. But then I see the gardens growing where bodies used to drop. See kids reading where addicts used to nod. See enemies embracing where blood used to flow. And I know this is what power really looks like. Not controlling corners, but creating futures. Not spreading fear, but spreading consciousness. Damon, I hope you see this. Your death birthed something beautiful, brother. Every child we save, every mind we free, every community we heal, that's your legacy. They killed your body, but gave life to a movement. And that movement, it's just getting started. Because once you show people they've been lied to about their limitations, once they taste real freedom, once they understand their power, there's no going back. The revolution isn't coming. The revolution is here, growing in every awakened mind.
Justice, when it finally came, arrived not through violence but through the very consciousness Marcus Jackson had cultivated. The federal investigation that brought down Detroit's corruption network read like a vindication of everything the movement had endured. Detective Ray Morrison, who had spent years hunting Marcus, now faced decades in prison for protecting drug operations. Councilman Robert Hayes, who had branded activists as criminals, stood exposed as the real gangster, his offshore accounts revealing millions in bribes. But Marcus didn't celebrate. Standing in the community center, watching news footage of his tormentors in handcuffs, he felt only sadness for the years lost, the lives destroyed while these men profited from suffering. Real victory isn't seeing your enemies fall, he told gathered members. It's making sure the system that created them falls too. The investigation's revelations sent shockwaves through Detroit's power structure. Federal prosecutors credited the movement's meticulous documentation. Every traffic stop recorded, every harassment logged, every bribe traced, with providing the evidence needed for convictions. The same cameras the system had feared became instruments of its exposure. Change came rapidly. The new police chief, brought in from outside to clean house, sought Marcus's input on reform. Foundation money that had avoided gang-affiliated programs now flowed freely. The movement's members, once branded unemployable, were recruited as violence interrupters, counselors, and community organizers. The skills that made them effective in the streets, reading people, understanding territory, commanding respect, made them invaluable in healing those same streets. When the invitation came to address the United Nations Conference on Urban Peacebuilding, Marcus stared at it in disbelief. The gang leader who couldn't leave Detroit without arrest warrants was now being asked to share his model with the world. The kid from the East Side would speak in the same halls as presidents and diplomats. Walking through the old neighborhood showed how far they'd come. Corner stores, once fortified like bunkers, now displayed fresh produce. Walls once marked with gang tags bloomed with murals celebrating African heritage and community leaders. Children played in parks where drug deals once dominated. The physical transformation reflected a deeper change. Hope had replaced despair. Purpose had replaced aimlessness. The visit to Damon's grave brought everything full circle. Marcus and his mother stood before the headstone, now surrounded by flowers instead of police tape. "He's proud," she whispered, clutching her surviving son. "Both my boys are heroes, just in different ways." Marcus placed an African liberation flag beside the flowers. Red for the bloodshed, black for the people, green for the land to be reclaimed. "We did it, little brother," he said softly. "Not how we thought, but we did it." The city's official recognition felt surreal. The same chambers where Marcus had been ejected for speaking truth now honored him for living it. Violence down 70% in movement territories. High school graduation rates doubled. Voter participation tripled. Numbers that told a story of transformation that no critic could deny. But Marcus knew the real triumph wasn't in statistics or recognition. It was in the eyes of young men who had found purpose beyond the corner. In the tears of mothers whose sons came home instead of going to morgues. In the laughter of children who could play without fear. Every saved life was a universe of possibility preserved. Training the next generation of leaders was Marcus's focus now. Jerome, who had once questioned what books could do against bullets, was teaching political education. Former soldiers were becoming generals in a different kind of army. The movement that began with one man's grief had become larger than any individual. The rally at Hart Plaza drew 10,000 people. Former gang members stood alongside professors, grandmothers beside teenagers, all united in a vision of justice that transcended old divisions. Signs reading "From Gangs to Greatness" and "Revolution Through Education" filled the plaza. The Detroit River flowed behind them, carrying away old pain while new possibilities bloomed on its banks. As Marcus approached the podium, the crowd erupted. These weren't followers. They were fellow travelers on a journey from darkness to light. The speech he was about to give would launch the movement nationally, spreading Detroit's model to Chicago, Los Angeles, Philadelphia. Cities where young men killed each other over corners they didn't own would learn there was another way. But first, Marcus looked up at the sky, feeling Damon's presence like sunlight on his face. They had turned mourning into morning, grief into growth, tragedy into triumph. The revolution that began at a graveside was about to transform a nation.
Standing here, looking at all these beautiful faces, I see what they never wanted us to see, our power united. Every former enemy now ally, every saved life, every freed mind, proves what we always knew but were trained to forget. We are not each other's enemies. They wanted us to believe we were animals, only capable of destruction. But look at what we built when we stopped believing their lies. Gardens where blood once flowed, schools where trap houses stood, unity where division reigned. This ain't the end, it's the beginning. Every city got its corners, its forgotten sons, its wasted warriors. What we did in Detroit can happen anywhere. Consciousness meets courage. The formula is simple. Turn gangs into armies, armies into movements, movements into revolution. Damon, this is for you, brother. For every brother and sister lost to the streets. Your deaths weren't in vain if they birthed transformation. Your sacrifice wasn't waste if it saves the next generation. They created their worst nightmare when they created conscious Black unity. Now we're spreading that nightmare to every hood in America. The revolution isn't coming. It's here, it's us, and it's unstoppable.
The revolution that began with one man's grief in a Detroit cemetery had become a global phenomenon. By 2010, the Detroit model was being implemented in over 50 cities worldwide. From the favelas of Rio to the townships of Johannesburg, from the estates of London to the barrios of Los Angeles, oppressed communities were discovering that their greatest weapon wasn't violence, it was consciousness. Marcus Jackson's transformation from gang leader to revolutionary educator became required study in universities that once would have barred him from entry. Sociology professors analyzed his methods. Psychology departments studied the transformation process. Business schools examined how gang structures could be converted to community organizations. The street scholar had become scholarly canon. The Damon Jackson Institute for Community Transformation, built on the site of former drug corners, trained thousands of leaders annually. Former gang members arrived hardened by streets and left equipped to heal them. The curriculum Marcus developed, mixing revolutionary theory with practical organizing, street wisdom with academic knowledge, proved reproducible across cultures and contexts. Statistics told only part of the story. 70% violence reduction in implementing neighborhoods. High school graduation rates doubled. Voter participation tripled. But behind each number was a human story. A mother who didn't bury her son, a child who found mentorship instead of membership, a community that chose creation over destruction. The testimonials revealed the true impact. Dr. Jerome Williams, once a drug dealer questioning the power of books, now headed trauma surgery at Detroit Medical Center, saving the kinds of lives he once might have taken. Maria Santos, recruited to the movement at 15, became the youngest elected official in Michigan history. Thousands of similar stories proved that transformation wasn't anomaly but possibility. Marcus's book, From Corners to Consciousness, a revolutionary blueprint, translated into 12 languages, spread the methodology globally. But he insisted the real text was written in transformed lives and healed communities. Books don't change worlds, he taught. People who read them do. Now in his 50s, gray streaking his beard but fire still burning in his eyes, Marcus had come full circle. In the same recreation center where he first challenged his soldiers to put down guns and pick up books, he now taught the next generation. These children, born into a community transformed, would never know corners as graveyards, only as gardens. The legacy wasn't just in reduced violence or increased opportunity. It was in proving that those written off by society as irredeemable could become its greatest redeemers. That gang structures, properly conscious, could become liberation structures. That the same passion that destroyed could create, if given purpose and direction. Damon Jackson had died at 21, killed by a system that saw him as threat instead of potential. But his death had birthed a movement that saved countless others from similar fates. Every transformed life was a monument to his memory. Every consciousness raised a flower on his grave.
They ask me about legacy, what I want to be remembered for. It ain't the awards or the books or the speeches at fancy conferences. It's the brother who didn't die last night because former enemies now protect each other. It's the sister who's in college instead of on the corner. It's the baby who will grow up in a community that nurtures instead of destroys. See, individual transformation is powerful, but collective transformation is unstoppable. When whole communities shift from destruction to construction, from unconscious to conscious, from divided to united, that's revolution. Not the kind with guns and glory, but the kind that actually changes things. Damon, every life saved carries your name. Every mind freed honors your memory. Every community healed is your resurrection. You didn't die, brother. You multiplied. And that multiplication continues every time someone chooses consciousness over chaos.
The story of Marcus Jackson isn't just history, it's blueprint. In every city, in every hood, in every corner where despair breeds violence, there are potential revolutionaries waiting for awakening. The question isn't whether transformation is possible. Marcus proved it is. The question is whether you'll be part of it. Right now, in your community, young men and women are making choices that will echo through generations. They're deciding between corners and classrooms, between destroying and building, between unconsciousness and awakening. Your action or inaction influences those choices. You don't need to be a former gang leader to create change. You don't need to have lived Marcus's exact experience to apply his lessons. What you need is the courage to see your community's potential instead of its problems, to build bridges where others build walls, to teach instead of judge. The system that killed Damon Jackson still operates. It still floods communities with drugs while building prisons for the addicted. It still denies education while punishing ignorance. It still creates conditions for violence, then calls the violent animals. But now we know its weakness, consciousness. Every mind awakened is a soldier lost to their army of oppression. Whether you're an educator who can reach the unreachable, a former street soldier who can redirect the misguided, a community member who can support transformation, or simply someone who believes change is possible, your time is now. The revolution doesn't need more mourners. It needs more Marcus Jacksons, in every hood, in every city, ready to transform pain into power.
Look, I ain't special. I'm just a brother who lost everything and decided to build instead of burn. If I could transform, if my soldiers could transform, if our whole community could transform, what's your excuse? Your hood needs you. Not the you that accepts things as they are, but the you that sees what could be. Every book you put in a young brother's hand is a bullet removed. Every consciousness you raise is a life saved. Every bridge you build between enemies is a future secured. The revolution is waiting for you. Question is, are you ready for it? Time to choose, corners or consciousness, destruction or construction, the old way or the only way forward. Choose wisely. Lives depend on it.